What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of 3 players every team should keep and 3 players every team should sell. And today we have Wolverhampton Wanderers here, and we are going to start with 3 players they should keep. Number 1, Ruben Neves. Now, linked with a move to a bigger club since he was captaining Porto ages ago. Every year he's linked to bigger clubs and things, and he's obviously, I don't want to say most important. He's definitely their best midfielder. I know a lot of people think when he sits with Roman Saiz and there's another midfielder in there, Saiz is obviously so important to the way Wolves play sometimes. Sometimes he plays at the back, but when he's sitting at the back end of a midfield, Saiz is super important. But Neves, probably their best player, their most creative, comes up with a long-range goal now and then. He can really hit them, score free kicks. He's one of those players who's at a club, I don't want to say better than, but when you think of Ruben Neves, he could start at a lot of big clubs. So he's at a club that maybe doesn't 100% suit his standards. You all know what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to be rude to Wolves or anything, but he's a top 6 kind of player. And anytime you have a top 6 kind of player, you want to keep him around, whether you're at the top of the table, whether you're mid-table, wherever it may be, you got to keep someone like Neves around. Number 2, this one is kind of a mix. This is Connor Cody / Willy Bolly here now. I have them both on there because they've both been linked with moves away, or they've both been, sometimes the fans get on a couple here and there. This is one of those things with Wolves in general where they are pretty thin in most spots. So, number 1, this whole second half of this video in which you have to sell 3 players, or in theory have to sell 3 players, is going to be tough because they're thin in general. But for me, center back is really, really thin. And unless you're going to bring in a really good center back and maybe a backup there, even if you bring in a really good center back, having both of these center backs around is super important, I feel. Building depth, especially if you're in Europe, that kind of stuff. Just keeping depth here is super important. So even if you do bring in a really, really good center back, you got to keep one, if not both, of these guys around. And number 3, Adama Traore. Now, I'm not going to say keep for reasons that you may think. Obviously, he is their probably most threatening player. Obviously, one of their better players. But keeping him this year also has to do, to me, with the pandemic. Now, there are a lot of bargain buys kind of happening. I mean, Van de Beek is going to go to United for $35 million. That seems a bit of a bargain to me. There are other teams bringing in players lower price, so some of these teams have to bring in a little bit of money to stay afloat right now. So there are a couple of things going on in there. Not too many people are going to want to pay $80 million for something, or for someone like Traore right now. Not because he's not worth it, but because $80 million is a lot of money to shell out in this current time that we're living in. And I think he's worth close to $80 million. If not, he is an absolute monster. He's a threat. When he comes off the bench, he takes over games. You want to get that $80 million. And even if you have to keep him for another year or two and he's slightly unhappy, you gotta make that money. You gotta make that money. Teams are gonna try and squeeze every penny out of everything they can right now. You cannot sell this on a bargain, and that's 100% of why I think you should stay right now. It's difficult. It's definitely difficult because, there are going to be bids. There are going to be, or in theory, you would think there would be bids from really big teams, City, United, Liverpool, big teams across Europe who would like Traore, and they are going to test that stance a little bit, but you got to hold on. You got to get, at minimum, if you're going to sell him, you got to get the money that you're asking for, that $80 million or whatever it may be that they're looking for. Do not give a discount for this pandemic because he is one of the better players there, and 2, if you're going to sell your best player, You got to bring in the money for him. All right, so we're on to 3 players that Wolves should sell. Now, this is a tough one because, as I said, they are pretty thin, top to bottom. They are relatively thin. You look across the squad, and there are players, of course, that you look at, and you're like, this is probably not Wolves quality, but if they go, I mean, you got players here who do you want them to fill in kind of things. It's a very difficult place to be in with a thin squad, especially going into Europe. But we have to find 3, and we are going to find 3. Number 1, Leo Bonatini, out on loan in Portugal for the last year or so, and it doesn't look like they're going to hit that clause. So he's going to come back to Wolves, and he's not really going to play. Let's be honest. He's not going to play out at Wolves. He's not going to play at the club he was loaned at. Obviously, they don't want to spend the money on him. You got to get him off the wage bill. You got to find someone who will take him, even if it's for relatively nothing. Just as we said in the pandemic, where everyone's trying to save money here and there, having players who are just going to sit around and collect checks, it doesn't really help anybody in that case, except, well, of course, the player. Number 2, Roderick Miranda. Now, since they've been promoted, he hasn't played a game. I mean, this is one of those simple ones where, you know, he's getting up there in age. Just time to split. Even if you guys could find a mutual termination, that's probably best for everybody. Just get the wages off the bill and move on. And number 3, this one I have in here because it's probably the most, I don't want to say the most realistic, but the best option for me in terms of the big players who are going to leave, and that's Raul Jimenez. Number 1, I don't think they should really get rid of Raul. Goal scorer, it's tough to find goal scorers in the Premier League, and he can do it. But we have to find 3 players here. And if you're going to get a good chunk of money for Jimenez, he's 29, going to be 30 soon. You're going to get 40-ish million. You can probably find a replacement there. Callum Wilson, you know, a player like that. Or, you know, there are players who around Europe you might feel you could get in on that kind of money. The thing is, 1, we have to find a 3rd player just for this exercise. Number 2, he's 29. As I said, he's getting up there. And number 3, you could get good money for that. And in a situation like this, in a pandemic like this, maybe turning a little bit of profit and bringing someone in who can handle it. I mean, if you were to swap Jimenez for someone like Callum Wilson, you're probably going to get similar-ish kind of results. I don't want to compare the two because they play in 2 different kind of styles to me. But if you think you can get that, if you think you can get the same production out of Callum Wilson that you can out of Jimenez, swap them, save a little bit of money in a pandemic like this where you don't know when fans are coming back. That might be a bit of good business. As I said, this is 100% hypothetical. I wouldn't move Jimenez on at this moment in time unless a monstrous bid came in. But for the exercise, we had to find 3, and he's probably the most realistic of the big players to move on and then find a replacement for. I don't think there are too many people out there who play like Adama Traore. I don't think there are too many players out there that you could bring in at Wolves who are going to replace someone like Neves. It's tough. I think he's the most realistic replacement, and that's why he's on the list, guys. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, guys. But that is going to be it. Hope you've enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. And peace.